Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen Khan.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast. In last week's episode, we discussed Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich, the man who made modern Chelsea. Be sure to give it a listen. Today we're talking about Pep Guardiola, who is already well on the way to establishing himself as the greatest of all time, the GOAT of football managers. He's 53 years old and has already won 34 senior trophies. Alex Ferguson, who's got 38, is the only manager whose record is ahead of Pep right now, but we think that he's probably going to beat him at the rate the City are going by 2025. So if indeed Pep is the GOAT, what about him makes him the greatest of all time? And we're going to try and get a little bit under the skin of the man beyond his footballing achievements to work out what makes him tick.
I also want to ask, can you be a GOAT and a human at the same time? Has Pep had to sacrifice some of his humanity in this manic quest for goatdom?
Or goatness.
Goaticity. I think maybe goathood is the thing.
Goatum.
So
we know someone called Goatum.
Yeah, is he the GOAT and also a human? That to me is what we're trying to find out.
So Simon, you spent a lot of time in Barcelona and some time in Spain recently. You've basically written the book on Barcelona. So when did you first come across Pep?
I mean, Pep and I are pretty much contemporaries, like twins. I'm about 14, 15 months older than him, so we're both Gen Xers.
But he's taller than you and he dresses better than you and he's probably better looking than you. So you're not really twins at all.
Probably not twins. But the time I got closest to him is I've been going to FC Barcelona and writing stuff there for about 30 years. Over time, I realized they'd come to see me as a kind of alum. So in 2019, I'm having lunch, in the bowels of the Camp Nou with the president and various of the vice presidents. Barcelona have like 20 or 30 vice presidents at any given moment.
It's like Goldman Sachs.
It's like Goldman Sachs. In fact, Goldman Sachs now run Barcelona, but that's a whole other story maybe we'll come to. So we're having this very Catalan lunch. It goes on for hours and hours and wonderful food and constant new wines. And I'm saying, I'm there to write an article. I'm saying, can I interview so-and-so and so-and-so? And they say, yeah, no problem. And they set it all up for me. So I'm sort of inside the club and I'm interviewing doctors and psychologists and youth coaches and the coach of the indoor football team and players. And I go away and I think, there's more than an article here. There's a book. They even let me play on the Camp Nou. I played on the grass. It was brilliant.
Did you do that thing where they make new signings and they give you a scarf and they do keep yuppies?
Yeah, there's pictures of me online with, shaking hands with the president with a FC Barcelona shirt, Mark Cooper. And so I thought, there's more than an article here. And I wrote someone and said, look, what if I did a book? Would you open all the doors? And they said, yeah. And they did. And so I went around the club for weeks and I spoke to people at all layers of the club, from the president to the person who does the changing room kit. And absolutely all these people knew Pep and had worked with him because Pep had hung around the club for 30 years, which is very rare in professional football. And he'd done everything from ball boy to head coach. And so I got this deep sense of where he'd come from, I think, and how he had grown up and made his life in the club with all the complications that brings with it. But you are the expert on where he was born and the earliness. So tell us about his childhood.
I guess his full name is Pep Guardiola Sala, not with a H on the end, like Muhammad, S-A-L-A. And he's born in 1971. And I guess you would describe him as maybe lower middle class. His father is a bricklayer. His mum is a homemaker. I don't think he comes from particularly esteemed family. He's a normal kid in a normal kind of family in a region of Spain, Catalonia, a few hundred kilometers from Barcelona.
He's in a village in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly. He calls it a middle of nowhere to such an extent that there are no cars on the road, so Pep spends a lot of his time playing football and other types of sports on the streets.
And when he's born, this is towards the end of General Franco's dictatorship of Spain, and the Catalan language is suppressed and forbidden, but in Santpedor, where he's from, they're so far away from anywhere, they just speak Catalan, and it's like nothing ever happened.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're sort of isolated a little bit from some of the more repressive parts of Franco's legacy. And we'll talk about his Catalan identity later. But Pep is obsessed by football. He has a poster of Michel Platini on his bedroom wall, even though he's never seen him play. And everyone in Santpedor is captivated by Barcelona. It's the only club in the town. Well, it's not actually the only club in Catalonia. And he tells a story about the only person he knew who didn't support Barcelona was his grandfather.
Who did your grandfather support?
Espanyol, I would say the lesser-known team, but yes. Now that Girona are doing quite well, maybe even the third team of Catalonia. And he said that's because his granddad was somebody that always rooted for the underdog. But otherwise, Barcelona is the only thing that exists in a lot of these kids' minds. It is the big club. And I guess a early sense of, what Catalan identity is centered around Barcelona. And he plays lots and lots of football.
And so, okay, so he's growing up in this place in the middle of nowhere. Football is his thing. Barcelona is the club, and then they come knocking.
Pep is 12 years old. He has his first trials at Barcelona. He thinks they don't go very well, but they do go well enough that he gets a call back. So the scouts at Barcelona call his father and say, we'd like to see more of Guardiola. But at that point, his parents actually don't think he's ready for it. So they don't even tell him that he had the potential opportunity to go and join La Masia. And it's only when he's 14 that they come back and say, well, how's he doing? We'd love to see more of him. And at that point, his parents think he's ready to go off to the bright lights of La Masia and become a Barcelona youth graduate.
And La Masia it actually literally means the farmhouse. And it is this old farmhouse. I think this 18th century farmhouse right next to the Camp Nou. And in those days, the academy boys lived in La Masia in the farmhouse. They all grow up there together. So Pep arrives in the big city, bright lights, big city, age 14. Barcelona has never really produced very good players at that point. He's training and he's also a ball boy. And there's this wonderful picture of him aged 14 celebrating with Terry Venables' Barcelona team after they win a trophy. And you totally recognize Pep, age 15, looking up, bright-eyed, into the face of El Tel, who's on a player's shoulders. And it reminded me of this other brilliant picture. Around that time, legendary France-Portugal semi in Marseille, 1984. Platini, Pep's hero, wins it with 119th minute goal. And who is the ball boy on the sideline? Zinedine Zidane, age 12. So they were all there already in Proto, yeah.
Coming full circle, so the player that Pep says is the greatest that he's ever trained at a young age, Phil Foden.
Ball boy too.
Ball boy too, famously behind the goal when Aguero scores that last-minute winner against QPR to win the league. Getting the ball boy slot apparently is quite competitive, but if you do, then, stardom awaits maybe.
Yeah, I know one of my sons is angling to be a ball boy at Paris Saint-Germain, but it's not that easy, yeah.
Yeah, Kanye West and Kim Kardashian's kids got to be ball boys at PSG, so, that tells you about how much of a status symbol it's become to get your kids as ball kids.
There's definitely a ball boy book to be written. I look forward to you doing that. So he's 14, Pep's arrived at La Masia and the academy, and all the boys live together in these dormitories. So they become very close, and his best friend, the kid he meets, is Tito Villanova. They kind of form this bond, and they will, 30 years later, become coaches of Barcelona together. Pep is the head coach, Tito is his assistant. And then they will fall out before Tito dies very young of cancer. We're going to talk about this later, but this relationship between Pep and Tito is part of the nature of Barça, because this is a club where people stick around for decades. Mostly it's local people. They don't really want to go anywhere. You don't see them usually. In those days, you never saw them popping up at other clubs elsewhere. So they get to know each other extremely intimately, and their personal and their working lives often intertwine. And then, of course, they conflict because it's very complicated if you're working with a close friend. But Guardiola, he grows up in this environment. He becomes a family member at Barça. He becomes sort of one of us. That relationship with Tito is very important because it tells you what kind of club Barça is. You wouldn't get that kind of thing at Chelsea or at Paris Saint-Germain. You might at Bayern Munich, but Barcelona is very unique in this kind of family and island nature of the club and the people who work there.
Do you think there was an expectation that Pep would always stay connected to Barcelona? So I've heard Fergie talk about Pep. He's a huge admirer, but the one thing that Fergie's always told Pep when I think they meet each other somewhere at UEFA, coaching session somewhere, and he says, you should have stayed. Stay with the club. That's your club. That's what Fergie did, I guess, with Manchester United. And he always thinks it's a bit of a blot on him that he just didn't stay and develop his entire managerial and footballing career at Barcelona.
Yes, and usually Barcelona people do stay because, of course, it's also the best city in Europe. So, writing a book about the club is not a punishment. You eat very well every evening. People don't really want to leave. And so a lot of the greats who come to Barcelona, like Johan Cruyff, who we're going to come to, Ladislav Kubala, they die there. When their time at the club ends, they don't go back home. Barcelona has become home, and it will happen with Messi. I suspect that Messi is going to spend the rest of his life after Miami and Barcelona. So it's very odd that Pep sort of chose the big wide world and left.
And I guess when we think about his life and what we're going to get onto, some of his inquisitorial nature, the fact that he wants to suck up other cultures, he wants to enrich himself, he wants to see different parts of
enrich
the
himself financially, but also
in every
also
sense
intellectually.
Of the word,
yes.
Means that he is a little bit of an anomaly when it comes to the Barcelona family and tradition. And maybe that is what makes him so unique.
He was a family member who left.
Let's talk about Pep, the player. Do you remember the first time you saw him play or remember him playing?
Yeah, you see, I grew up in Holland. And to Dutch people, Barcelona is a Dutch club that happens to play in Spain because Johan Cruyff, who is the greatest figure in Dutch football, he goes there first as a player and then as a coach. So in the late 80s, when Pep is in his late teens and on the brink of the first team, Cruyff is the head coach. So I was, sort of following it all obsessively. And of course, you notice this guy because usually he played at the back of midfield. He couldn't tackle and he couldn't run. And he also wasn't particularly tall. And so with all these limitations, Cruyff says, oh, well, we're also going to play you in central defence, which might seem an odd thing for somebody who is slow and can't defend, but that's what Cruyff did. He played in the slowest central defence in the history of football alongside Ronald Koeman, who was even slower than Pep. And so both of them could hardly move, but they were such intelligent footballers and such wonderful passers of the ball out that they actually survive. And in this era, Barcelona wins the Champions League in 1992, the club's first ever Champions League, with them two in the team. And Guardiola's mostly in midfield then. But anyway, him getting into the team is not a given all his limitations. And so how is he discovered? Well, there's a lot of versions of the story of how Guardiola is unearthed. Even Cruyff tells different versions. I say Johan Cruyff. Most people will know him as Johan Cruyff because foreigners unfortunately cannot pronounce his name. So when I say Cruyff, you will hear Cruyff, and just however you want to pronounce it, be happy and do it.
I'll butcher it myself, don't worry.
Just butcher. So Cruyff is head of the first team. It's about 1988, and he needs a central midfielder. And so he asks the youth coaches, who's the best kid in the Masia? And the youth coaches say, well, Pep's the best player in the Masia. And so Cruyff goes to the mini Estadi, which used to be next to the Camp Nou, and he tries to take his place unnoticed. Of course, everybody's looking at him because he's the head coach of FC Barcelona. And he sits there and he looks at the field and Pep's not on the field. And Cruyff says, well, where is Pep? You told me he's the best player. And the coach said, yeah, he's the best player, but he's too slow, so we don't put him in the team. And Cruyff says, well, this is nonsense. So I'm going to put him into the senior team. So Pep goes straight to Barcelona B, and pretty soon he's in the first team. He's this playmaker at the back of midfield. After his first game, what does Cruyff say to him? He says,
he's slower than my grandmother. Which grandmother's apparently, is it a Dutch motif or a Catalan motif?
I think in 1950s Amsterdam, where Cruyff was growing up, grandmothers were a big thing.
Grandmothers are around a lot. Yeah.
So when Cruyff says you're slower than my grandmother, I think it's also meant affectionately. And he really likes Pep because he sees that Pep has this brain. He can't tackle, but he doesn't need to tackle because he understands how to push the midfield forward to shrink space when the opposition have the ball. And Pep is the coach on the field. He makes tactical changes. He doesn't have to wait for Cruyff to tell him. Pep moves the lines. He becomes what at Barcelona they call the pivote.
The number 4, which we now call it. Although I think in Europe it's the 6.
Yeah, so I think in the Ajax system it was the 6, and then later it became the 4. For Cruyff it was a 6. And at Barcelona now they say pivote. He also could move the ball faster because Pep never wanted to be caught in a one-on-one with somebody because he didn't want to be crunched. He would already know where the ball was going long before it got to him. Nobody ever got the chance to tackle Pep because the ball had already moved ahead. So he was completely incapable of some things, like running, but he was the best at passing. So he's making his way slowly into the first team, and he's building this relationship with Cruyff because what's happening is he's come to the big city and Pep has this brain and he's taking it all in. This is incredibly exciting for him to be in Barcelona. So he goes to poetry readings, he studies at a university there for a bit, he becomes mates with journalists, becomes mates with the much older anti-Franco singer-songwriter Luis Lach, who's a kind of Catalan Joan Baez. But really the guy he's learning most from in these years, around the end of the 80s, early 90s, is Cruyff. And Pep later says, I knew nothing about football until I met Cruyff.
And this coincides with an upsurge in Barcelona, who become perhaps in the early 90s, late 80s, the team that we see as rivaling Real Madrid as the best team in Spain. So Pep eventually becomes club captain after Cruyff has left.
Yeah, but really, I mean, Cruyff stays till 96, and then when they sack him, he smashes up his office. But until then, he and Pep are talking football the whole time. Pep becomes Cruyff's disciple, and he learns his philosophy. So when you watch City today, you're watching an advanced version of what he learned from Cruyff at Barcelona 30 years ago. So Pep learns we're going to spend the whole game in the other team's half. We're going to play one-touch passes. The passes have to be diagonals. Our players are going to switch position all the time. And the second we lose the ball, we press to win it back. So he absorbs kind of whole cloth everything that Cruyff and Rinus Michels had developed in Amsterdam in the late 60s. It's kind of gets passed on in this kind of biblical genealogy from the master to the disciple. And the disciple is Pep. And the main thing he learns from Cruyff is we never change the way we play. We die with our own ideas. We never adapt. We never compromise. We're never going to sit back and defend. And so all the way through Pep's career, his teams have played this constantly updated version of the kind of what people call the Dutch total football.
But Pep does change, and he has developed the game. I mean,
He
every couple of
learns and
years.
grows. Yeah, because Pep is a guy who every day he goes out into the world and he's thinking, what can I learn? What idea can I steal from this person I'm
I mean, I
talking
would
to?
argue that even in every iteration of Pep's style of football, the number 4 is probably always the most important player on the pitch. So we'll talk about them later. Busquets, Rodri, Xabi Alonso. It's probably not an accident that that's
His own position becomes the key position.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so something's changed and he updates it because what Pep understands early is football is always improving. So the football of 2024 is better than the football of 2023. So you can't go into 2024 playing the football of 2023. You have to constantly evolve what you're doing. And Pep says football is evolution, but he sticks to certain principles like we play in your half, we press, we change positions. And as you say,
we dominate the ball.
The pivote is the key figure, and we keep the ball on the ground. So for the best years of his career in his early 20s, Pep is Cruyff's brain on the field. He is putting the other players where they should be at any given moment. But he has his detractors because the detractors look at him and, in Spain, half the population doesn't like FC Barcelona. And they look at him and they say, yeah, but this guy runs like Cruyff's grandmother and he can't tackle and he shouldn't really be playing top-level football at all. What annoys his detractors as well, he speaks about football in this very highfalutin language like he's talking about art or philosophy. And so the critics call him El Mito, or the myth.
Why do they call him the myth?
I think they call him the myth because they're implying there's nothing really there. Here's this guy who really shouldn't be in the team because of his flaws, but he has this big mouth and talks about football as if it's a kind of art form.
I think Mourinho's one of the jibes that he says at him a bit later on in their managerial careers that he's a philosopher. And of course, for Mourinho, that's the worst possible thing to be, a cerebral football manager who thinks about the game and wants to play pretty football.
We will come back to the very vicious Mourinho-Pep relationship later.
So, Barcelona do well with Pep as a key figure in the Cruyff team. Cruyff is then sacked, as you say. Louis van Gaal joins. Pep has quite a difficult relationship with him. And actually, at the age of 30, his career at Barcelona sort of peters out relatively unremarkably. And today, if you think, central midfielder at the age of 30, you think, well, he's got a good 4 or 5 years left. But very quickly, Pep's looking for pastures new. And it's a bit of kind of a subdued exit for someone we now consider to be a legend of the club.
Yeah, I mean, I would say from his late 20s on, they kind of lose interest in him. He becomes one of the worst paid players as they start signing these expensive foreigners, and he's a bit resentful of that. And I suppose football is speeding up and is leaving him behind. But he's already also thinking, I'm going to be a coach. And at this point, another man walks into his life who is strangely like Pep, but will turn into the anti-Pep.
Another twin.
Your friend.
The evil twin.
Your hero.
Jose Mourinho, who's very close to my heart, as we'll come to talk about in subsequent episodes.
Yeah, so Mourinho pitches up at Barcelona in the late 90s, and he's come there with Bobby Robson, who's the new head coach. And Robson had gone to Portugal. Robson, great man, but not able to speak a word of a foreign language, so he could not speak any Portuguese. And happily, there's this handsome young man who speaks perfect English and is very obliging and becomes Robson's translator, who is Mourinho. And
speaks Catalan.
And then he comes to Barcelona, and Mourinho can speak any language, so pretty soon he's speaking Catalan. It's something else he has in common with Pep, actually, because Pep speaks 5 languages. And Pep, of course, grew up bilingual with Catalan and Spanish. So easy for him to learn languages. And so Mourinho and Pep meet each other, and Mourinho is trying to change from translator. In Barcelona, he's known mockingly as El Traductor, the translator, into an assistant coach. And he does this because he impresses Van Gaal and Robson with his football knowledge. So they give him tasks, becomes an assistant coach. And Pep is planning to be a coach as well. So these two young men in their 20s, they're both going to be a great manager. They're sure of that. And they start to talk and they get on.
It's quite an influential position because if you think about it, so Mourinho's job is to translate what Robson wants to communicate to the players. And Pep, who understands both English and Catalan, knows that Mourinho is embellishing, right? And adding in some of his own technical observations and building on what Robson's saying. So I think Pep is able to discern quite quickly that this guy is not just giving us a rote translation of whatever Bobby wants.
Yeah, I think Bobby did not discern that. So he thought that Mourinho was being his loyal servant. Yeah. You know, what I think happens to a lot of very bright people in their 20s is they're not given senior jobs like head coach because you're too young. But they look at the people in senior jobs and they think, you're just a buffoon. I'm going to be better than you. And I think that's what Pep and Mourinho both feel when they look at the people who are coaching
I feel like you're
clubs.
like that as well.
I was like that in my 20s, yeah.
I
but
still
you
get
were like
I
that.
still, the way you look at me, this guy thinks I'm an idiot.
Well, you think I look down on you because you're young?
No, just generally because you think I'm an idiot.
Well, I mean, there is...
There is that. Okay, so we've got these two guys, Jose Mourinho, Pep Guardiola. This will become a footballing rivalry that will define an age. In some ways, we're still kind of living with it. But actually, it's a very promising beginning. They find, I think, some commonality in each other. They respect each other very much. And then it all goes disastrously wrong for their personal and their professional relationships. But they are actually on a track to stardom in their late 20s, both of them.
Yeah, so Pep has this plan, my football career, as he says, winding down, but I'm going to prepare to become a coach by playing my final years for the great coaches who I really respect. And he has identified this great coach who he wants to play for, Arsene Wenger. And he goes to London and sees Wenger and says, look, you're a great coach. Why don't I join Arsenal and play for you? And Wenger says, yeah, we have this guy in central midfield, guy called Patrick Vieira.
It's not bad.
He's not bad. I don't really think we need you, Pep. I like you, but, and so Pep has to go elsewhere.
But the great manager that really wanted him was Fergie. So he needed someone in central midfield. He knew that Pep was leaving Barcelona. He really, really wants Pep, tries to tap him up, I guess, in modern terms. But Pep then thinks, well, if I can't do Arsenal, I'll go to Italy. And then Manchester United actually end up with Juan Sebastian Veron, which is probably one of the worst signings of the Fergie era.
Yeah.
And that's
Veron, guy who could do everything but never at the right moment. So Pep, he's a loser at Barcelona. He's kind of being pushed out of Barcelona, and then he said no to Manchester United.
He says no to Manchester United. So
wow,
probably maybe some consecutive errors of judgment from him. Maybe not leaving Barcelona, but the reason he wants to go to Italy, of course, because he still remembers Platini. Barcelona get trounced by Milan, so he thinks there's something about Italian football that he needs to learn, probably the defensive side of the game. And again, he tries to pick coaches that can help him learn.
Yeah, so he even goes to the small Mexican club to play for, is it Juan Lila, who is a little-known coach who Pep hugely respects and later brings to City to join the City staff. And he also makes a bit of cash playing in Qatar, and this relationship with the Qataris is going to last. We'll come back to that. So what we're seeing here is an extremely ambitious young man. He has a plan. He's going to become a great coach. He's going to become the next Cruyff, but better, because he's not going to be lazy like Cruyff, and he's going to plan ahead and scout the opposition that Cruyff never used to do. And so he has a ruthless ambition that everything else is going to have to yield to.
So Pep's playing career peters out. He becomes a bit of a journeyman in Mexico and Qatar, although he's probably finding managers and players that he wants to work with. But at the age of 35, he formally retires from football. And within 2 years, he gets his dream job. Not only that, he becomes very quickly an incredibly successful manager at FC Barcelona.
Yeah, we're going to look at how this happens, how you go from zero coaching experience to getting one of the biggest jobs in world football, age just 37, head coach of Barcelona, and then you end the year, your first year in coaching, as the most successful coach in football and essentially as the Pep Guardiola that we know today. How on earth does that happen?
Find out after the break how he gets there.
Não é tempo técnico, mas é intervalo aqui no podcast. Já imaginou se seu time tivesse um seguro para não perder nunca? Pois é, isso não existe. Mas com a Zurich Seguros, quem não perde nunca é você. Na Zurich Seguros, os planos se adequam às suas necessidades em qualquer momento da sua vida. Seja seguro de auto, residência, vida e muito mais. Diferente de alguns times, na Zurich Seguros você pode confiar. Para saber mais, acesse zurich.com.br ou consulte seu corretor.
This is a reminder that you're listening to Heroes and Humans of Football with me, Simon Cooper.
And me, Mehreen Khan. You join us as we're discussing Pep Guardiola's entry into management. And Simon, you probably missed a scoop of the century, didn't you, on this story?
I did, I have to admit. So this is spring 2008, and I'm at Barcelona, and I'm having this big lunch, and I'm sitting next to one of the 400 vice presidents at the club, this woman vice president. And we're talking about who's going to be the next head coach because, the team is in disarray. Van Rijkaard is being pushed out. The players are misbehaving, especially Ronaldinho is drinking too much and partying, and Deco. Everything's a mess. They need a new head coach. This woman says, well, I think our new head coach should be Pep Guardiola. And I thought, that's bonkers. He's 36, 37 years old. He's never coached a professional team before. He's coaching Barça B in like the 3rd division or 4th division. He can't be head coach of a big club like Barça. And she says, yeah, but, he's a Catalan and we should be giving our big jobs to Catalans. She said, for example, Victor Valdez was not a very good goalkeeper, but he was a Catalan, so we stuck him in goal and he got better and now he's all right. I thought, yeah, this is never going to happen. This is just some Catalan nationalist fantasy. So I didn't write about it.
So as a typical columnist, you couldn't see a story if it slaps you in the face.
Yeah, I did not write the story. I hold my hands up in shame. But the thing is, even Pep thinks they're not going to appoint me as head coach because obviously in 2008, the guy that Barcelona is going to make their new head coach is going to be Jose Mourinho. That's obvious, right? Mourinho is the winningest coach in football. I mean, you're a Chelsea fan, God knows why. And 2008, he's already been sacked by Chelsea.
Fallen out with Chelsea, he needs something else to do. I mean, he falls out, but he still goes out on a high because everyone's still mourning the loss of Mourinho. So in terms of leverage and power and influence, he's
a massive winner. But the club he really wants to work at is Barça, because Barça have this very talented young player who's coming to maturity, a kid called Leo Messi. And they have Xavi and Iniesta in midfield. And Mourinho thinks there's a lot of potential here. Barcelona is my former home. It's where I came as a translator and left as assistant coach. I definitely want to be head coach there. And they have a job interview with Mourinho in Lisbon. He just completely kills it. He does a brilliant job interview, gives a superb presentation. But Barca also interviewed Guardiola because, you want to interview the local man as well, the person who's coming up within the organization. And at Pep's own interview, he asks the Barca director, why don't you just hire Mourinho? It would be easier for you. So they're obviously going to hire Mourinho. But club officials have drawn up this 9-point document on the criteria that the new coach had to meet. This is summer 2008. And one bit in the document is about the coach's dealings with the media. And it specifies our new head coach must act cautiously at all times, must respect opponents, referees, and other institutions in general. Fair play. That's not Mourinho, right?
He's also had this vicious relationship with the incumbent Frank Rijkaard. At one point, he accuses Rijkaard of, going into the referee's changing room at halftime when Chelsea and Barcelona are playing each other in the Champions League. Mourinho's branded enemy of football.
It's one of Mourinho's crazy conspiracy theories that turns out to be true.
We think it's actually far truer than it was, but he serves a 2-match ban, and, that leads to this infamous story of Mourinho sneaking himself into the Chelsea changing room for the next round against Bayern Munich in a wash basket.
Okay, so Mourinho is the winningest coach in football, but he is obviously not somebody who respects opponents, referees, and other institutions in general. Fair play.
Is there a sense in which that criteria was actually designed to exclude Mourinho?
That probably was part of the thinking. If we write this, then it definitely can't be Mourinho. So in the end, because they want a polite head coach, they go for the polite Catalan Pep Guardiola as head coach. And no other big club in football would have taken a risk like that. You appoint a 37-year-old who's never coached a proper team before. But then Barça is a kind of big family club. And it has a lot of the dysfunctionality you get in families. But being a family club, the people at the top of the club, including the president, Juan Laporta, who's president again today, and Laporta's advisor, Cruyff, who when he's not playing golf is mouthing off about what Barca should do, these guys have known Pep since he was a teenager. And they think he's never coached a team, but he's a pretty clever kid. He can do this. When Guardiola's daughter is born in a local maternity ward just by the stadium, Laporta comes into the maternity ward to visit the happy family. And he says, Pep, we want you to be head coach. And Pep says, you would never have the balls to do it. And he gets the job. And it's this idyllic family scene. It's like a nativity scene in the local hospital, but it's not as idyllic as it looks because there's also...
Where the goat is born.
The goat is born. Also, the daughter is born and the goat is born. There's also this typical family tension that Laporta and Pep are sort of distrustful of each other because in the presidential elections before, Pep had backed the opposite candidates to Laporta.
Which is not the done thing. You don't...
Yeah, so Barca is it's like a family. It's a very complicated place. There's a lot of love and there's a lot of anger and distrust.
So he's on the wrong side of the faction, but he still makes it.
Well, because he's Cruyff's son in football. He's Cruyff's spiritual son. And Laporta is Cruyff's fanboy. So Laporta says to Cruyff, who should we take? And Cruyff says, take Pep.
From the outside, it looks like you don't choose Mourinho if you're the president because you want a coach that's a bit biddable, who you can mould, who's a bit enthralled to you. So you don't choose Mourinho who's out of control. And that's why you go for Guardiola.
Yeah, Guardiola is polite and he will always pretend to listen to the president. But Guardiola is as stubborn as Mourinho. He just hides it a little bit better.
So Mourinho at this point is furious, thinks they made a terrible error, and probably secretly is out here, hitting them with curses.
Yeah, he's like a wicked witch in the fairy tale, cursing Barcelona forever. And the reason Mourinho is so angry, he thinks these ex-footballers, they always get an easy ride. They always get these coaching jobs, even when they've never thought about it and they have no experience. It's completely unfair, Mourinho thinks. And he has this jibe about ex-players getting coaching jobs. He says, well, you don't need to have had toothache to become a dentist. So why do you need to have played football to coach football? And so he tells Juan Laporta, the club have made a terrible mistake. He's sort of cursing Barça.
So at this point, Pep is 37. He is in charge of one of the biggest clubs in Europe. There's no other way that could have ever happened if it wasn't Barcelona, and he wasn't a Barcelona man.
Yeah, it wouldn't have happened at any other big club. No untried coach would get that job like that.
And thus begins the era of proving Mourinho wrong and also uncovering what would become one of the greatest talents in football.
The greatest talent in football.
The greatest talent in football. I don't think we're going to dispute that one. Who's already hanging around the Barca ranks. He's probably been a bit too influenced by some of the bad influences like Ronaldinho and Deco. But Pep is going to take Leo Messi and turn him into the GOAT.
So it's 2008, summer 2008. Messi's 21 and Messi turns himself into the GOAT. You don't coach Messi, you just watch him play. Messi has grown up enough that he is now always making the right decisions. He's no longer trying to beat 11 players all by himself. Sometimes he'll beat 3 guys and put it in the top corner. Sometimes he'll do a 1-2 with Xavi. Sometimes he'll give a brilliant pass. He's finally learned to make the right decision. So Pep has become coach just at the right moment. So he inherits this dysfunctional team. The best player, Ronaldinho, who was the best player in the world at one point, has gone off the rails. He's drinking, he's out partying. In fact, this friend of mine at this point is invited to write Ronaldinho's autobiography to ghost it. And he flies into Barcelona and he's in bed, and about 2 a.m, Ronaldinho's entourage call him and say, come to the nightclub, Ronaldinho's ready to talk to you. So my friend goes to the nightclub at 2 a.m. and meets Ronaldinho, and he's thinking, this is not really how the world's best player should be living. So Ronaldinho is out of control and he's inviting Messi out. Messi's just a kid with a flower pot haircut. He's very impressed by Ronaldinho. And so Messi's starting to go out clubbing as well. Obviously, Messi had never been into a club before in his life at this point. And Deco, brilliant Portuguese midfielder, difficult guy. And they all sit around in this niche in the changing rooms talking together and kind of ignoring the Catalan players. So it's a terrible atmosphere in the changing room. And Pep thinks Ronaldinho was the best player in the world. Now he's just a drunk and I'm going to kick him out of the club.
So Ronaldinho's gone, Deco's gone. Eto'o manages to hold on, but that relationship doesn't really improve, even though Eto'o does well on the pitch. And so we've got early signs of actually very ruthless, I don't want you in my team and I can do much better without you, with unpromising players that you've never heard of, like Busquets or Pedro. And he makes it work.
Yeah, he's very unsentimental and he's not scared. He's not scared of Ronaldinho, who, people thought was going to be the best player in the world for a decade.
And also enforces Spanish and Catalan in and around changing rooms and in the canteens.
Yeah, I interviewed Van Rijkaard around that time when he was the head coach and said to Rijkaard, so what's the language of the changing rooms? And he said it was supposed to be Spanish. At Barcelona, they don't speak Catalan in the changing rooms typically. It's Spanish because that allows the Latin American players to communicate. So Messi always felt alienated when people spoke Catalan because Messi never really learned any Catalan. But what they didn't want was people sitting around, Ronaldinho and Deco sitting around talking Portuguese together and because in a changing room like that, you have all these cliques.
Yeah.
And one of the problems of the Camp Nou changing rooms, what you'd sometimes see is Dutch coaches and players speaking Dutch to each other.
No one wants to hear that.
Ronaldinho and Deco speaking Portuguese. Because the changing room was so big and had so many nooks, the cliques would separate into different parts. So when Pep became City manager, he was allowed to design the changing room at City. And he designed this as this kind of oval. So everyone was kind of facing each other. There was no room for cliques because he'd seen at Barcelona when he took over a team with cliques and he was going to eradicate that. But the season starts terribly. And at the beginning of 2008-2009 season, it looks like Mourinho's going to be right. The first 3 or 4 games, nothing works. And he has to bring in this pivote, this central midfielder from the Masia, a kid who also can't move called Sergio Busquets.
He's also gangly, all limbs.
He's like a big version of Pep. And by the end of the season, they have won everything. So that first year, Pep, as a coach, he wins the Spanish League and the Champions League, and they're playing the most beautiful Cruyffian football. I mean, I was at the final of the Champions League 2009, Barça Manchester United, and I think that's the day when Messi becomes the greatest. He rises above Rio Ferdinand. Ferdinand's about 6 feet taller than Messi. And Messi climbs above him and heads over Edwin van der Sar, the tallest man in football, into the top corner. Barca play brilliantly. They win 2-0. United don't really see the ball. And that's the moment when Pep's coaching debut becomes the best season really of any coach in history. And the tiki-taka style for which Pep came famous, although he hates the phrase tiki-taka, emerges here perfect from the start. But then, how much is Pep and how much is it that he's coaching Messi, Xavi, Iniesta and all that?
So tiki-taka is derogatory because it implies you're just, passing the ball around for fun. But whereas Pep's whole thing is that, no, we pass with purpose.
Yeah, behind every pass there must be a thought. We're always trying to move the ball towards goal, towards scoring. We are planning. And even when we're doing something, he has this weird thing, the 15 pass rule at that point, that the team have to make 15 passes before they're allowed to try and score. And the aim is that those 15 passes get you moving together as a unit. All 10 outfield players are moving towards the other team's goal as a unit. He doesn't like fast breaks where there's just two guys trying to score.
And every time you pass, you're basically forcing the opposition to make a decision.
Yeah, you're pulling the opposition out of shape. He says it's the same as basketball. You pass the ball around the left, you lure the opposition there, and then you switch to the right and you score. He says the same as basketball, it's the same as chess.
So Pep has developed this incredibly distinctive style of play, which is also proving to be insanely successful. They win La Liga, they win the Spanish Cup, they win the Champions League, then they go on to win all the other things. What happens when you win the Champions League, the Super Cup, the Club World Cup, every possible trophy going, Pep wins it within his first season.
So in that first season as a coach, Messi has come to full maturity and Pep starts building the whole team and later the whole club around Messi. And Pep, he's really a video analyst as much as a coach. So he spends the whole week sitting in this cave in the Camp Nou, this coach's room, which doesn't have windows. It looks like a kind of small storeroom. And he sits there and he puts a lamp there and a carpet to make it nice. And he spends the whole week watching videos of the next team they're going to play. And one week they're going to play Real Madrid, so he watches Real Madrid all week, and he notices there's a gap between Real Madrid's central defenders and their central midfielders. There's a gap which is too big. And he gets very excited, because Pep gets overexcited easily, and he calls Messi, and he says, Leo, can you come in? So Messi, in the evening, knocks at the coach's door. Pep points to the screen and says, you see this gap between their central midfield and their central defence? That's where you're going to run into. A few minutes into the game, they suddenly switch over so that Real Madrid can't immediately anticipate. And Messi becomes what they call a false nine, a pretend centre forward, because he's not all the way up. He's playing a bit behind where centre forward would be in this gap. And they annihilate Real Madrid. They win 6-2 because the central defenders don't know whether to step up and take Messi or to stay in their position. And that kind of is the beginning of a whole new phase for Messi as a false nine, where he cuts in from the right and ends up in the space, the unmarked space between central defenders and central midfielders.
So Messi's centrality to this team and actually to Barcelona now is really embedding himself. And a lot in the book, you also talk about how Barcelona at this point is a club which is run by the motive and the maxim of what does Messi want.
Pep realises this kid is the thing. We've got to keep him here for 10 years. Anything he wants, we'll do. But it's very hard to work out what Messi wants because at this stage of his career, he doesn't speak. His nickname is El Mudo, the mute one. So he has very strong views on football because Messi, one reason he's a great player is he's a great analyst of football. He sees everything on the field, but he doesn't tell you what he thinks. So you have to read his body language, and Pep is very good at reading people, also good at manipulating people. And one day he sees Messi sulking on the team bus, and Pep goes and sits next to Messi and starts talking to him and draws him out. And Messi essentially says this: you've signed this big Swede, this guy Zlatan Ibrahimovic. And Pep thinks, yeah, Zlatan, great. He scored in all his first 5 games. Brilliant signing. Messi says, yeah, it's not good. I don't like him there because I cut in from the right and I come into the centre. And then when I get to the centre, there's this big, massive Swede standing in my way telling me to give him the ball. And that's not good. So I'm sulking. And Pep thinks, right, we paid an enormous amount of money for Zlatan. We also gave Inter Milan Samuel Eto'o, but it's over for Zlatan. He has to go. Boom. If Messi doesn't want him, he's dead. So he drops Zlatan. Ibrahimovic is outraged. How can they drop me? I'm Muhammad Ali. How can they possibly? And he comes in and he shouts at Pep. He treats Zlatan politely and pushes him out, and then pretty soon Zlatan is sold. And years later, when I interviewed Ibrahimovic's then agent, Mino Raiola, who unfortunately died young, as soon as I mentioned Pep, Raiola goes into this kind of rant. Terrible man, he doesn't have balls. He didn't even tell us why he got rid of Ibrahimovic, because Pep is polite, but he is going to clear away anyone that Messi doesn't want. So from this point, Messi owns the club. Messi is really the club president, and Pep is his hatchet man.
So Zlatan is another piece of collateral damage in, I guess, Pep's ruthlessness and at this point, his ability to cede to Messi's will, whatever that will may be. And I guess the difference between Zlatan and, say, Ronaldinho and Deco, who at this point are just becoming bad at football, is that Zlatan's doing really well, but they've got to get rid of him because Messi's not happy.
Yeah, Pep is pleasant. He knows how to behave. He doesn't shout at people, but he's a killer. He's an ice-cold killer. And he is going to be the GOAT, and he is going to get better in every year, and anyone who stands in his way gets eliminated. I don't want to make him sound like the Godfather, but everyone who stands in his way gets pushed out.
And also there's a paradox in that this is not an entirely meritocratic way to run your football team, because you have players that are performing, they're doing what they need to do. Zlatan is scoring goals. Yaya Toure at that point, who is then rivaling Busquets for that central midfield berth, is a very, very talented player. He also ends up leaving because he knows that Pep's not going to pick him. So maybe there is a sense in which Pep does have his favourites. Of course, Messi, it's self-evident.
I think Pep is unsentimental. I think you can be a great player, but if you're not the right great player for this team, it's over. He doesn't care. And of course, great players are not used to having anyone tell them it's over, go away, goodbye. But Pep is not afraid of anyone. And Zlatan makes the mistake of thinking that Pep is a softie, in his old-fashioned macho language, not a real man. Pep is a hard ass.
So the kids would call Pep a beater at this point. He's soft and he's philosophical, and, whereas Zlatan is like the ultimate macho man, right?
Extreme macho.
Extreme macho. And that also explains why Zlatan speaks so unceremoniously about Pep in his book. And it's probably the first time I ever encountered a player really, really going after Pep. But that's the story. It's the Messi story.
Yeah, it's because they kick Zlatan out and Zlatan doesn't take that. What you say, Pep's a beta? Kids,
A beta.
A beta male.
Alpha, beta, yeah.
He's a beta male.
Yeah.
I think Pep is an alpha male disguised as a beta male.
Yeah, which is probably the best type of male you want to be.
Yeah, it's been very effective for Pep, yeah. So Guardiola is coaching the best team in football. From 2008 through 2012, Barça are winning everything. And he's not an original coach because he's getting all his ideas from Cruyff. He's just kind of updating and evolving Cruyff's ideas of football. But he's a better coach than Cruyff. Cruyff invented it, but Guardiola does it better. Because Cruyff, the guy under whom Guardiola played, he was a bit of a lazy coach. He never really bothered watching the opposition because Cruyff didn't really care how the other team played. We were just going to play our way. And Guardiola spends the whole week watching the opposition. Guardiola's also a much better man manager than Cruyff because Cruyff was a nutcase who was always fighting with everyone. And Cruyff himself saw that Guardiola was much better with people than Cruyff was. So Cruyff said Guardiola was the most reasonable, far-sighted person he'd ever coached, along with Dennis Bergkamp. And Cruyff said you could ask them for advice because they could think about the problems of other people. There's very few footballers who can think about the problems of their teammates. But Guardiola already as a player was he was thinking about what is the right back's problem, what is the centre forward's problem. And Guardiola, he speaks much better than Cruyff. So he's much better at explaining his insights to the players. And he uses simple language, the 15-pass rule. There's the 4-second rule. When we lose the ball, we spend 4 seconds chasing around to win it back. And so Cruyff was the original. But Guardiola is Cruyff 2.0. He's a better Cruyff.
So there's many ways in which he outdoes Cruyff, and his professionalism is clearly one of them. And also this obsession, this poring over the minutiae, not having that much mental headspace for anything else apart from football. Is that the kind of guy he is becoming?
I think so, because Pep, like a lot of people who want to be the best at what they do, who find a vocation in life, whether that's being a surgeon or being a carpenter or being a football coach, they want to do it really, really well. Arsene Wenger is another figure like this. And they realize that to be the best carpenter or football coach you can be, it means you have to think about it every second of the day, every day. You can't really have a life outside that. And so Pep, he has a wife, she runs a boutique in Barcelona, he has 2 kids, and I'm sure he loves them. He has friends, but really the focus of his life more and more becomes coaching. It becomes something he thinks about every second of the day. He has this right-hand man called Manel Estiarte. He's not known in football, but he was known in water polo. He was the Maradona of water polo. He's the best water polo player of the late 80s. He becomes Pep's assistant. And Estiarte introduces what he calls the 32-minute rule. 32 minutes is the longest that Pep can go without thinking about football. And then he's back on it. Yeah, it's exhausting. And so Pep's head is constantly thinking about details of football. And so at this point, as he's trying to become the GOAT, he's becoming less of a human.
So it's 2010, and now we enter the period of what is going to become the Mourinho-Pep rivalry, which at its beginnings definitely goes in Jose's favour. He's manager of Inter Milan. It's the semi-finals of the Champions League in 2010. He goes to the Camp Nou with a 3-1 lead, ends up winning 3-2 on aggregate, and leads to one of the most amazing things I've ever watched in a football match, which after the whistles ended, Mourinho runs from his dugout across the Camp Nou pitch in his suit and tie, pointing up at the stands. He's got Samuel Eto'o behind him, who's at this point playing for Inter Milan, takes his shirt off. They're both running around like maniacs, celebrating a defeat of what at that point is the best team in the world.
Yeah, and I would say up to that night, the person that Barcelona fans hated most was General Franco, but now I think Mourinho beats him to number one spot. And brilliantly, the Barcelona ground staff turn on the sprinklers. And the club later said, we always turn on the sprinklers at the end of the match, but especially when the opposition coach is doing celebrations on the turf, yeah. And then Real Madrid think, brilliant, we need an antidote
we found
to
our
Pep.
guy, yeah.
We need someone who can beat Pep. Well, Mourinho. So they hire Mourinho as head coach.
So Mourinho goes on to win the Champions League with Inter Milan, which I have to say is, he also wins it with Porto. These are not two teams that you would ever really thought of as Champions League winners. But at this point, I think Mourinho's kind of approaching the apex of his career.
Yeah, the two biggest clubs in the world at this point, Madrid and Barcelona, and it sets up the rivalry perfectly because they're opposites, these guys. They were friends at Barcelona in the late 90s, but they're opposites. Pep loves attacking football. Mourinho believes defensive football is best. Their personalities are opposite. Pep is this buttoned-up Catalan, polite, and Mourinho is this brash showman. And Mourinho has totally not got over being rejected by Barca. It's like a girlfriend rejected him, and he will never, ever come to terms with it. And so for 2 years, they're coaching against each other at Madrid and Barca. And Mourinho thinks this guy Pep, he's just wrong and he's a hypocrite. And Pep thinks that the best way to win is attacking football, but Mourinho thinks that's just wrong and it's moralistic because obviously the best way to win football matches, Mourinho thinks, is you hang back and then you break because then the opposition don't have their defence in place. And he also thinks Pep is this hypocrite. He pretends to be this goody-goody, always going on about beautiful football. But Mourinho thinks secretly this bloke Pep is manipulating referees. And in Spain, there's now evidence that Barcelona were manipulating referees. Quite recently, they were charged with alleged bribery for paying more than 7 million euros to companies owned by the former vice president of Spain's Technical Committee of Referees. And this supposedly happened from 2001 to 2018, a period that includes the Pep years. There's no evidence that Pep knew about these payments, and Laporta, the club president, has said that Barca made these payments for technical reports on refereeing. I don't know, would you pay 7 million euros for technical reports on refereeing?
I think you're right that there's definitely a moral tone to the way that Mourinho approaches Pep. So not only is this lingering corruption, which he's never really able to prove, but also the sense that the way that Pep plays football is like indulgent, and that's not what football is supposed to be. And it's interesting that the two players that get on Pep's bad side, Ibrahimovic and Eto'o, both love Mourinho, right? They talk about him in glowing terms. He's able to relate to them on a very human and I guess male level, which also then shows you, again, how much these two guys are the antithesis of one another.
Yeah, and they think, this passing around, it's just a waste of time. It's the worst system in football. It gives the opposition defence all the time they want to get into position. And they say the only reason Pep wins is because he has Messi, and Messi, can score against any defence.
So Mourinho's shooting his shots at Pep, but I think one of the interesting things is Pep never really fires back.
Pep does not do straight-on confrontation. Pep has this mission. He's going to be the GOAT. Everything must yield to this. And he doesn't display his ego. Pep has a very strong ego, but he doesn't let it get in the way of his success, whereas Mourinho, the ego always, I think, takes precedence.
I think we should give him his props for that he never really rises to the bait. Every press conference, it's like, Mourinho said this about you, Mourinho said that about you, and he just never engages.
I think there's also something Catalan about it. It's an incredibly polite society, and Pep is an extreme Catalan in that sense, and he beats Mourinho. 2008, 2012, Pep's years as coach of Barca, they win everything. Real Madrid do not win the Champions League in that period, and they're epic battles. But I think you have to say that Pep walks away the winner.
And I'd probably say that, as much as Mourinho is derided, we probably can only really appreciate how great Pep is because there was the alternative, which was the Mourinho style of football, which probably puts the way Pep played into much sharper relief.
Yeah. It was just this perfect kind of patience and morality play, and everyone around the world in football was transfixed by it in those years. But at the end of 4 years at Barça, so it's 2012, Pep has been there for 4 years. He's coached the team with Messi, Xavi and Iniesta. They've won everything. It's been brilliant. They've played beautiful football, but Pep is totally shattered. He can't take it anymore. He says he can't seduce his team anymore. He doesn't think he has to motivate players. Players motivate themselves, but he has to seduce them into following him, into total concentration every second on the training field, and he feels he can't do it anymore. So he resigns in 2012 to take a sabbatical in New York. And he thinks, well, obviously, if I'm leaving Barça, then my sidekick, Tito Vilanova, is going to leave with me. After all, he thinks, Tito and I, we've been friends since the academy, since we were 14-year-old kids in Masia. Tito will come with me. But Barcelona say to Tito, do you want to be head coach now that Pep's going? And Tito says, of course, yeah, I'd love to be head coach. So anyone else would have said the same. So Tito stays on as head coach, and Pep feels it's this terrible betrayal. He feels, how can Tito, my lifelong friend, do this to me? He's abandoning me.
I think it's a bit of a stretch to think that Tito is abandoning Pep when it looks from the outside that Pep abandoned Barcelona. And if he is your best mate, he's just got the biggest job in world football. There should be a degree to which you're very, very happy for him.
I think what's going on in Pep's mind is Pep has started to see himself as the center of the world. Everything revolves around him. He's this massive coach.
Everyone else is playing a cameo role in this movie.
Everyone else is playing a cameo in his movie. Yeah. And even Messi is just an instrument to help make Pep the GOAT of coaching. And Villanova is just his instrument, just his sidekick. So Pep can't forgive Tito for betraying him, as Pep sees it, and staying at Barcelona. And these guys fall out. Lifelong friends, now in their early 40s. They fall out, they stop speaking, and Pep goes off.
How does he end up in New York?
Well, every club in football wants him, but Pep doesn't just take job offers. He decides where he's going to go. So all the biggest clubs in football are courting him, but he says, no, I'm going to go and recharge and I'm going to learn, because Pep is on this lifelong learning mission. Every day he wants to learn. And his friend Xavier Salai Martin, he's from your world, he's a star economist. He's teaching at Columbia in New York. And Pep says, can I come to Columbia and follow some of your classes at Columbia University? And Saleh Martin says, yeah, come. And New York's a great city. You can learn a lot and people won't bother you because most people here don't care about soccer. And so he goes to New York and he improves his English and he hangs out with Woody Allen and he talks to Garry Kasparov about chess and football, and he's learning every day, because Pep calls himself an ideas thief. He's a guy who'll listen to the lowest status person he meets. He'll listen to a waiter if he thinks the waiter has something interesting to say about football. So I knew this guy in Argentina, Matias Mana. He was in his early 20s. He had a football blog. He'd never done anything. But he somehow gets in touch with Pep, and Pep realizes this kid, Matias Mana, he's a nobody, but he really knows a lot about football. So they talk and talk and talk. And Pep's the kind of guy who can sit 14 hours literally talking about football. And when he goes to Argentina, he hangs out with Matias. And Matias Mana, as a result of Pep, gains some kind of status in football. And there's a happy end. When Argentina win the World Cup in 2022, Matias Mana is one of the assistant coaches. So
wow.
Beautiful story. So Pep will listen to anyone, doesn't matter if they're famous or not, if he can learn.
And so Pep is living this relatively incognito life in New York, which throws up some very strange encounters.
So most people in New York have no idea who this, unshaven, Hispanic-looking guy in a baseball cap is. And that gives him quite a lot of freedom. He has 3 kids, and one of them, the boy, is playing kids football. And so Pep, he has time because he's on sabbatical, and so he goes with the kid to the soccer matches. There's one point, this is about 2013, we're in New York, and kids' indoor soccer tournament in Rockville Center, New York, and they're missing a referee. A referee hasn't shown up. So one of the organizers asks the parents, does anyone know the rules of soccer well enough to call a game? And so this Hispanic guy in a baseball cap says, yeah, I know a bit about football. I can be the referee. So he's given the whistle. But then when the game starts, it turns out that Pep, as referee, nobody recognizes him as Pep. He sees himself as more than just a referee. He keeps stopping the game, the kids' game, to advise players on both teams about their positioning. No, you don't want to be here. You want to be more left. And then you want to sprint into the empty space. And the parents who are watching, they don't like this at all. They've come to see their kids win, and they start shouting, come on, let them play. Not realizing that the guy coaching their kids is Pep Guardiola.
Pep is basically taking on the most formidable demographic in the US, which is soccer moms.
And there's another story. He's watching a kid's game. Nobody recognizes him again. And at halftime, he goes up to the opposing team striker, this kid who's probably about 10 years old. And he starts saying, yeah, I like the way you play, but you want to run this circle and then you want to hook back left. And he's teaching the kid how to be a better centre forward. And the kid's dad sees this and runs up and says, who are you telling my kid how to play? That's really Pep. He's a guy who's obsessed with football, whatever level it's played. He just loves this thing. It's his whole mental space is occupied by it. He's a workaholic and he's as interested in a 10-year-old kid as in coaching Messi.
And he still does it. So there's a clip from a couple of years ago, Man City are playing away at Southampton, and Nathan Redmond, one of their midfielders, he's having a brilliant game. He's doing really, really well. And at halftime, Redmond's walking off and Pep sprints up to him, puts his arm around him and starts coaching him, telling him, you know, you need to be getting closer to the box, you need to break the lines more. And you just sort of see Redmond looking completely befuddled. And according to some lip syncers, he's just saying, well, I'm just doing what the gaffer wants me to do, boss. You know, so it's incredible the kind of almost non-partisan way in which he's still able to think about footballers and how they should be playing the game best to win for their team, even if it's not his team.
Yeah, he's obsessed with, even if they're playing against his team, he's obsessed with the game and his craft, and more than sort of with the people around him. And that brings us back to Tito. So Tito, his mate from childhood, Tito Villanova, they'd coached Barcelona together. Then Tito had betrayed Pep by becoming Barça head coach. But very soon after Tito replaces Pep as Barça's head coach, Tito develops throat cancer. And at one point, he leaves Barcelona in the middle of the season. He flies to New York to see the best specialists for several weeks of treatment for his cancer. Guardiola is in New York at this time. He's on sabbatical. And he visits Tito once. And Tito says in public, at a time when I really needed my old friend, he wasn't there for me. So the Tito family feel very, very dismayed. And then in 2014, Tito dies. He's 45 years old. And Pep makes a moving statement about him. But the Villanova family have had it with Pep. And Tito's widow bans Pep from the funeral. So I think this is a story about how as Pep becomes the GOAT, he becomes less of a human. He has developed the kind of ruthlessness that you often see at the top, where players and staff are just instruments to achieve success more than they are humans. And I feel that Pep has become this person who cares more about the game than about anyone in it.
Do you think he's become denatured to some extent?
Yeah, I think a lot of people in top jobs become less human because in top jobs you have to fire people, you have to make decisions that destroy somebody's career in an instant, you have to take a job that other people want. So I think to be that kind of person operating at the top, you have to have that kind of cruelty that I think Pep has in him.
So he's in New York. And he's also learning German along with all of his studies at Columbia University and hanging out with Gary Kasparov. And that's because he's already decided while he's in New York that he's going to take his next job, which is Bayern Munich.
Yeah, so during the New York year, he agrees to go to Bayern. Now, why does he go to Bayern? Because he could go anywhere. But Bayern have a project. They're serious people. They're not just looking for a coach to plug a gap and to please the fans. They have a project. Bayern have always won in Germany since the 70s, but they've never really developed their own style of football. They're quite an opportunist club, and they play at this massive pace, and they have the German virtues of kind of power and strength, but they want to really start playing beautiful football. They want to be more like Barcelona. And so they come with a plan and they hire Pep. And he has a very satisfying time there in some ways, and they win the Bundesliga every season, but they never win the Champions League. And there's this one disastrous moment when they're playing Real Madrid in the semi of the Champions League. Pep talks to his players and the players say, let's play 4-2-4, boss. Let's play 4-2-4. And Pep thinks, yeah, that's not a good idea. But
let's go back to the way we used to play, basically, yeah.
Yeah, they want to play a more German style, more helter-skelter. And he lets them play 4-2-4 and they lose 4-0 at home to Real Madrid. And he's devastated afterwards. You start to hear more of the charge, well, Pep only won stuff at Barcelona because he had Messi, because he had this incredible team. And Pep never denies that. He sometimes says, the best thing that happened to me as a coach was that I was the guy who was coaching Messi. But at Bayern, he's not just being the old Pep. He never wants to be the old Pep. He always wants to be the new Pep, next year's Pep. He's always making himself next year's Pep. He's reinventing himself, and he's learning from German football. So he thinks they play at, 200 miles an hour. That's pretty good. I like that. And so we're going to play Pep football, but at 200 miles an hour. And he thinks, well, when we have the ball, we have these wingers already, Robben and Ribéry. So what are our fullbacks going to do when we have the ball? I know. I'm going to move them into central midfield.
Invert.
And so he is developing And he's also learning, in New York, he was thinking about how to speak to each player differently. Because at Barça, he addressed the players as a team. So in the 2009 Champions League final, he's made this gladiator-style video of the team's best moments to kind of motivate them before the match. And later he thinks that was a bad idea because players don't really see themselves as part of a team. Every player is there for his own career and is thinking of his own career. And also players have different levels of intelligence and how they think about football. So at Bayern, he thinks, well, you can't really talk football to Frank Ribéry because Ribéry is too stupid, brilliant footballer, but he can't really absorb instructions. You can talk all day about tactics to Sebastian Schweinsteiger because he just loves it. He just loves, he's like Pep, he wants to talk football for 14 hours. And with Philippe Lahm, you give him a 3-second instruction and he completely gets the whole thing because Lahm understands everything about football. So Pep learns you have to speak to every player differently.
There's a couple of things that happen at Bayern Munich. One is that he develops this monkey on his back that Pep can't win the Champions League without Messi, something he only actually gets rid of in 2023. And the other one is probably this kind of mental and emotional dexterity to understand how to communicate with players at their own level.
Yeah, and he's also learning that as a coach in modern football, you can't really be a dictator because these players now, they earn so much money, they can leave the club if they want to in an instant. And so you have to work in collaboration with them. You're not the general as the football manager. You're more like a film director where you're coaxing the actor to give the actor's best performance. So if you're the director trying to get Brad Pitt to do a role, you're not saying, you go there and then you come back and you stop talking, in the kind of way Alex Ferguson would have in the 80s. And I feel that British fans like yourself kind of admire and expect the manager to be that kind of dictator figure. It doesn't happen anymore. The players are not deferential. And Pep is learning that. You have to seduce them.
And there's another story about Foden, which I think just not from too long ago, where he berates Foden. I think he kind of blazes a free kick over or just doesn't follow instruction. And you see Pep absolutely going after him. And at the end of the match, Foden goes up to Pep and says, you can't talk to me like that. Like, you can't single me out and you can't berate me like that. And you would expect the normal reaction to be like, Foden gets suspended or Foden's got to, pay some of his wages back to the club. And Pep's like, I admire you for saying that. You should be standing up for yourself and you're right, which is very, very huge, I think, culture change in the way English football, especially when you're younger players and you have managers as acclaimed as Guardiola. But that's the kind of relationship he's developing. Perhaps one more of respect than commanding deference.
It's more a relationship of equality because Foden thinks, listen, mate, you're lucky I'm playing for you. I could play anywhere.
Yeah.
I can leave. I can walk out tomorrow morning. Also, I have, 20 million quid in the bank already, so I'm not afraid of you. And Guardiola understands that that's how it now works.
On the seduction point, one sort of theory that's been posited by a couple of football journalists is one of the reasons that they're so successful at seducing their players, Mourinho and Pep, is because they're pretty good-looking men. They're charming, they're well-dressed, they look the way you'd want, men in their 40s and 50s to look, and therefore it commands a degree to which younger players or players of any kind want to impress these guys.
Yeah, I think football, there's a lot of suppressed homoeroticism, and looks are very important, and footballers are obsessed with their looks. So a lot of footballers have a full-time stylist on their payroll because everyone is always looking at the footballer. You're constantly exposed more than a film star because the film star is only sort of seen once a year when a movie comes out. The footballer is seen every week. So they're obsessed with how they look and how people around them look. And so, I think it's important that the coach looks good. And that's part of Pep's power. Also that his wife dresses him. So his wife runs a boutique. So that's why he's also the best dressed coach in football. Okay, so Pep's had these 3 years at Bayern. He's done really well, but he hasn't won the Champions League. But still, he has the pick of any club in football pretty much. Now, he's much cannier than Mourinho in choosing clubs because Mourinho, when he gets the chance, he just goes to the biggest club he can. He goes to Real Madrid, to Manchester United, even though those clubs aren't really right for him. Madrid's a club where stars always rank higher than the coach, which not what Mourinho likes. And United believe in attacking football, not what Mourinho likes. So Mourinho makes these mistakes in choosing clubs. But Guardiola always makes a clever jump. So first he recharges through his sabbatical, then he joins Bayern, a club with a plan, and that wants him to impose his football for the long term. Now, in 2016, where's he going to go? Who does he go to? He goes to City because he sees they're the perfect club for him because it's a club. They have all the money in the world. They're owned by this Emirati sheikh who doesn't care about football, so he's never there. The sheikh never comes to watch the club pretty much, and so he just lets them get on with it. And the people actually running City are these two Catalans who've known Pep pretty much since he was so high. Ferran Soriano and Chiqui Bigueristan. And they love Pep. Bigueristan played with Pep. And they say to Pep, you come to City and you can do whatever you want. There's all the money in the world here, and nobody will bother you. And the media don't even really care much about City.
And they're underachieving at this point. So even though they've got all the riches, they've never really managed to
They haven't won a
themselves.
Champions League yet. Yeah, they're starting to win Premier Leagues, but they're coming from nowhere. The fans love everything that happens because the fans have, played in the third division, and they're just living this complete dream. So the fans aren't putting pressure on City. The media don't really care much about City. So it's a great, calm place to work. Now, Pep always has to live in the city centre because he loves, he's a peasant who came to the city, so he loves city centres. And he says, I want to live in a mansion in the city centre. Manchester City say, well, there isn't, that house doesn't exist in Manchester.
Also, nobody lives in city. All footballers live in huge houses in suburbs of the cities they live in.
Yeah, so there are these places around Manchester where huge numbers of Premier League footballers live.
Footballers' Row, yeah.
And clubs tend not to like footballers living in the centre of Manchester because the nightlife is a bit too good. But anyway, Pep wants this mansion in the city, and the club says, you know what, well, it doesn't exist, but we're just going to build it for you because we really want you to come here. So he comes to City, and everything is in place for him to do his best work, which is really the thing that he cares about. But meanwhile, just as he's getting going in Manchester, something is happening in Catalonia.
Yeah, it's 2017, and I think for people who weren't really observing it, separatism is coming back in Spain. And in 2017, the Catalans, so they have considered themselves often to have a special identity, but there is a group of Catalan leaders who are part of a political party who want to hold a referendum.
To become independent. They want to break away from Spain and become...
Exactly. They want to secede from the Spanish state. Yeah. And the Spanish constitution does not allow that. So this is technically an illegal referendum. This is not like Brexit where, the country's government of the day has decided that we want to settle this question. This is, to some degree, a rebel political movement in Catalonia that wants to push for independence. In 2017, they win.
And Pep is sort of ambiguous figure in this whole thing because he never comes out and says that he's for independence, but he says we should have a referendum, and he speaks at this massive rally saying we must have a referendum even if the state doesn't want it. And he's a voice for Catalanism, and it matters because he's the most famous Catalan in the world. And this really pisses off probably most of Spain.
Yeah.
Because Spaniards really are upset by this. I mean, I lived in Madrid for a year, 2021, 22, and I was very interested in this because I was comparing it to England and Scotland. So if Scotland became independent, I think most people in England wouldn't care. They'd hardly notice.
I don't think that's true.
It's not a big deal.
Maybe
anyway.
Northern Ireland, they wouldn't care, but they definitely care about Scotland.
But anyway, it's just not existential for most English people. In Spain, people were so upset when the Catalans wanted to break away. This one Spaniard told me that the Catalan referendum of 2017 is the biggest trauma of modern Spain.
Yeah, it's a complete rupture. And the other thing that happens, which maybe is a bit of a mitigation for Pep, is that there's a huge amount of, persecution and jailing of the Catalan leaders. So for him,
they're jailed for holding an illegal referendum.
Exactly,
yeah.
But there is a sense in which they're being pursued by the legal system and the government's trying to crack down on them. So he goes through most of the 2017 season wearing this little yellow ribbon, which is in solidarity with the protest movements and the leaders of the movement who are then being persecuted. So I'm in Brussels at this point, and weirdly, this story comes directly into Brussels because one of the main leaders of the movement and the party, Carles Puigdemont, seeks political refuge in Belgium because that's why Belgium exists. It's a place of refuge for political refugees.
I was already wondering why Belgium existed.
That's the main reason Belgium exists. And I saw it firsthand, just how poisonous this issue becomes. I mean, political parties develop out of it with a complete stance, which is either pro or against independence. It's still basically left scars in modern Spain today, 5 or 6 years on.
Yeah. And it's helped make Pep still hated through much of Spain.
And he loses his friends. So he talks about the 1992 Spanish team that win the Olympics. Some of the members of that team have publicly voiced how upset and disappointed they are in Pep. I mean, one of them says that, we've got a WhatsApp group from all the alum of the 92 group, and Pep's not part of it anymore. So there is a personal cost for him coming out in favour of independence. And that's, maybe at the cost of the relationships he's made with his Spanish colleagues. It's also why we can say that he's never really going to ever be a contender for Spain manager because he would never want that. Never really recanted either. I don't think he's ever come out to say, not to apologise, but maybe to distance himself from the movement or some of the things that were happening in 2017.
One of the most amazing football matches I've ever been to emotionally was Real Madrid, Man City, the semi-final of the Champions League 2022. Real Madrid are losing and it looks like City are going to win and go to the final. And then just before injury time, Madrid score. And it's still not enough. They need another goal or two. And then the injury time length is announced. and the assistant linesman holds up this board and it says there'll be 6 minutes of injury time. And the Bernabeu, I'm there with my sons, there's 80,000 people there, and there's this massive roar. It's like they've won the Champions League in that moment because they think, it's only 6 minutes, but we are going to do this. We are going to crush these English people. We're going to crush Pep's team.
They've also done it in the previous round already to Chelsea.
Yeah, they always come back. They always have remontadas. They come back, and playing at the Bernabeu when Real Madrid are going, I mean, it's just a nightmare for the opposition. Even City, which was a brilliant team. And so that Real Madrid do it. I think Rodrigo scores, maybe Rodrigo scores twice. And I don't think I've ever heard a stadium make that much noise. And City walk off crushed. And 80,000 Madrileños leave the stadium. And everyone is chanting about Pep. Because this whole beating Manchester City for them, it was all about Pep, who is the kind of arch enemy of Madrid and also the arch enemy they feel of Spain, the guy who supports the breakup of Spain. And for Madrid fans, he's the perfect villain because not only was he the hyper-successful coach of Barça, but he's also the face of Catalan nationalism. So he combines those two evil things into one. Now, given Pep's support for Catalan referendum, and he says we must support democracy, I love democracy, we must be free to vote on independence. People say, well, you're a bit of a hypocrite, aren't you? You support a referendum for Catalonia, even though they're already parts of a democratic country. Spain is a complete democracy. And meanwhile, Pep, people say, you're happy to take loads of money from Qatar to be an ambassador for their World Cup bid. Qatar, not such a democracy, right? But you're totally in bed with them. And you're also working at City, where you're effectively an employee and an ambassador for another undemocratic Gulf state, the United Arab Emirates. So, Pep, you're not such a friend of democracy then, really, are you? I find that charge of hypocrisy against him quite convincing, don't you?
I'm not too sure. I think it's a bit lazy to say just because your bosses are people who have political systems that do not represent Western democracy, that you're not able to support any causes of democracy. I think actually the problem with what the Catalan movement became was that it became an incredibly chauvinistic one which perhaps relied on sort of historical grievances about their own oppression and why they didn't like other parts of the country, which I think are a little bit difficult to sustain. So I actually think there's an issue with what that movement became and sort of Pep being an unwavering supporter without really having much nuance. And now, a few years on, not really saying that it was a bit of a misjudgment, or not to apologize, but to perhaps build bridges again with some of the people that he pissed off. I think that's where he's sort of gone wrong. I don't think he's a hypocrite. I think his principles are just not consistent, and I think most of us are probably guilty of that.
Yeah, me too. But with Pep, I feel it's also more that his principles are for his spare time, because he's on this quest to be the GOAT of coaching. And so really he cares more about football than about democracy. And the way he sees sheikhs and oligarchs and autocratic rulers with lots of money is very typical for sports people. And the way it works in sport is if you're a megastar like Pep and the sheikh owns your club and you have dinner with the sheikh or with the sheikh's family, and the sheikh is a lovely guy, he's very friendly to you, he asks about your family, he seems nice, and you realize while you're having this incredible dinner that you shouldn't really believe what the media says about the sheikh, and you shouldn't believe about the things that have happened to political opponents, and the sheikh gives you all the money that you need to build this team to play the football you've always dreamed of, and it's much easier working with the sheikh than with Barcelona directors. In Barcelona you have dozens of people running around the club all trying to subvert each other and make decisions, and at City it's much simpler because you've got the sheikh and the sheikh isn't even there, and the sheikh can make big decisions in an instant. Isn't it brilliant? So I think a lot of people in sport, they meet the sheikh or the oligarch and they think, he's a really good guy. And then he soon forgot about it and went back to City, where he was building this brilliant team that is winning everything. And it peaks. The City project comes to its climax. Last June in Istanbul, I was there, where they win the Champions League. They play horribly, actually. It's an appalling match. And
they should have lost.
They should have lost to Inter Milan. And Carlin, who is their star striker, he seems destroyed by nerves. And he has the worst match of his career. And he plays like he's a fourth division striker. But they nick it 1-0, goal by Rodri. And Pep has won his third Champions League, which, I mean, it was always silly to say Pep could only win the Champions League with Messi, because winning the Champions League is slightly random. There's a lot of luck involved, as in any knockout competition. But anyway, now he's won 3 Champions League. I think only Ancelotti of coaches has ever won more. Ancelotti has 4.
He's par with Zidane.
He's on a par with Zidane, although Zidane was only a coach for about 4 minutes. But still, he's won 3 Champions League. It's really not bad. And he is hot in pursuit of GOATness.
So to get a personal insight into Pep the man, Simon, you've spoken to one of your very good friends, John Carlin.
And John is also a friend of Pep's. And John is a massive celeb in his own right. He wrote the scripts of what became the movie Invictus with Clint Eastwood. And also, although he didn't even realize this himself for a long time, he wrote the kind of basic of what became Die Hard 4. John is a British-Spanish journalist, and he's a good friend of Pep's. So we've got him to talk about Pep.
Let's play the clip.
John, can you talk about how you got to know Pep Guardiola?
I first met him in New York. If you remember, he took a year sabbatical between his time at Barcelona, his glorious first era as a manager, and going to Bayern Munich. And I was working on making a film about him and his team and Barça. And we've been pretty good friends ever since. We've had lunch or dinner a number of times, either one-on-one or with other people. And I've got a number of good friends who are very close friends of his. So I think I have a bit of a feel for him as a person.
What is your feel?
Well, he has lots of enemies, in particular in Spain, outside Catalonia, but even within Catalonia and within Barcelona, which is a very fractious club. But I think he's a very decent guy. He is a good friend to his friends. He's a loyal friend to people who do not necessarily provide him with any kind of a step up in his career. He's a very curious person.
Our sense of him is that he's somebody who's on a kind of lifelong learning path, inside football and outside. Is that the Pep that you know?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, he's forever seeking to do the impossible, which is to perfect the game of football, not just to be immensely successful, to make it into a work of art, which of course you can't do because you're always thwarted by the pesky players on the other team. But he is on this quest for football perfection.
One thing that puzzles me about him is he grew up in the most, delectable city in Europe, in Barcelona. And he loves the things that people love about Barcelona, the beauty of the place, the food, the kind of long evenings sitting around talking and drinking. And then he moves to Manchester, which, to my mind, doesn't offer quite that. Why does he seem to have adopted Manchester as his place?
It's something that we have talked about. He does love Barcelona. He obviously has a home here, and he loves the things that Barcelona offers, such as, for example, food. And obviously, there's the weather factor, the perennial thing we turn back to. Here we have magnificent weather. Manchester is not known for that. And indeed, when I saw him, I had lunch with him not long after he arrived in Manchester, and he confessed that indeed, Munich, where he'd just been at Bayern, was a city that had more charms than Manchester. But he's made it his home. He's happy there. And I think the fact that he's now been a city for going on 7 years, I think, and looks likely maybe to stay for a couple more, is testament to the absolute centrality of football in his life. As a football manager, he's found a place where he is content, where he's free to do his thing. And I think the freedom to do his thing, and I think that's the secret. And I think he's formed a bond with the city and with the club in a way that goes beyond his own personal needs in terms of quality of life.
That was a fascinating chat, Simon. And I think before we discuss the legacy of Pep, we've got him still at City, where apparently he's very happy running a club which is quite centralised and to his whims. His family have moved on, his kids have grown up, but he's still at City, and apparently he could stay at City for a very long time, with one notable caveat that he's said publicly on record, that if City are found guilty of any types of breaches of financial fair play or malfeasance, that he would walk away from the club. And right now they have this very complicated case hanging over them, which probably won't take a few years to resolve, but maybe that was the only trigger that would lead to a premature exit from City. Okay, so we're approaching the end. Let's talk about his legacy and his footprint. You already mentioned that everything Guardiola kind of does is derivative, but that's almost the nature of being a football manager, that you're not original.
Yeah, I mean, he's never claimed to be an original manager. He's always been a disciple of Cruyff who kind of improves Cruyff's ideas in football. Because football in our time, it's a bit like what's happened in lots of academic fields. Most of the big discoveries have already been made. We know what pressing is. We know that passes should be diagonal, not sideways or vertical. So we know much more about football than we did when Cruyff sort of began thinking about it 50 years ago. And the job of Pep's generation is to advance and fine-tune the work of the pioneers. And obviously he's done that brilliantly. His trophy cabinet is on track to overtake Ferguson's in the next year or two. So he is heading to become the coaching goat. He's kept evolving all his time. His thinking on tactics has kept evolving. So, for example, Cruyff was all about the wings. We attack over the wings, and Guardiola has come to believe in dominating the centre of the field. And you see that City is, I mean, there are aspects of their game that are very similar to Barça, but City is a very different kind of football team than the Barça of 10 years ago, right?
And even the City of a couple of years ago. So there's been a huge evolution of this team in the last 18 months. They're a big team. They're a team full of giants. There's 4 centre-backs playing across the back of the field. You know, when he arrived, he had people like Leroy Sané on the wings who would want to come inside. Now you've got like Doku, who's completely direct, runs at players.
Yeah, and you've got this giant ogre at centre forward as well that the whole team is increasingly built around.
To some degree, he looks like he plays more of a 4-4-2 because he plays Alvarez and Haaland together, which is not something we've seen in English football for a long time. But Pep's kind of, so I think the evolution of his own teams is what keeps him at the top. And actually all other managers, to misquote Tottenham manager Postecoglou, who was like, how are you getting your team to play so well? He was like, well, I'm just copying Pep, right? And he's kind of a bit blatant and a bit blunt about it. But that seems to be what's really going on in English football. Not just at the Premier League level, but at all levels.
Yeah, and you see that in who's winning leagues, which managers are winning leagues.
Yeah, so the season just gone by, 2022-2023, Pep and his disciples win leagues. So you've got Xavi, who won La Liga with Barcelona. You have Vincent Kompany, who wins a championship with Burnley. You don't have Arteta winning with Arsenal. That's only because Pep just about pips him to the post.
Yeah, and on the other side of Manchester, Erik ten Hag is also to some degree a disciple of Pep's, because ten Hag comes from this Dutch Cruyffian school, but he was then also the coach of Bayern Munich's second team in the Pep era, and he studied and learned from Pep. So Pep's disciple works for what used to be the main rival, Man U.
And this season, I think still the only team in Europe's top 5 leagues that have not lost a game is Bayer Leverkusen. And Xabi Alonso, who was Pep's player at Bayern Munich, is their manager. So I think in terms of his influence and the prodigies and the players who've worked with Pep or seen Pep are now coming to dominate all levels of football in Europe.
And for a contrast, I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you'd have said, well, the other model is Mourinho. But Mourinho has really been sort of downgraded and discredited. I mean, he's been sacked by AS Roma this season. And you see that Pep could keep evolving and Mourinho couldn't. And I think what happened in the last 10 years in football is largely under impulses from Pep in particular. Europe's top teams evolved this hyper-aggressive pressing football. I think Jurgen Klopp called it rock and roll football. Yeah. And you could call it Cruyff 4.0 or storming football. And so you just press at this amazing pace that's never been seen before. And I think the original game is Brazil-Germany 1-7, where the Germans press the Brazilians like maniacs just outside their own penalty area. Humiliate them. And then 2020, you get Bayern humiliating Barcelona 8-2, that kind of hyper-aggressive pressing using the fitness of modern players to press with a frequency and a pace we've never seen before. And that leaves Mourinho behind, because Mourinho's never really been that interested in pressing. His game is we set back, we don't move around that much, and then we break at top pace. And so he's not able to use the physical capabilities that modern players have, because that's just not the way he coaches teams. And so like a lot of past innovators, he gets left behind. That's what happens to innovators usually. It happened to Arsene Wenger, he got left behind, to Cruyff himself. And Pep never wants to be left behind. He always wants to be inventing the next football, being at the cutting edge of football innovation, while also winning an unfeasible amount of trophies every season and playing incredible, beautiful football. And Pep, you have to say, whether you like him or not, Pep has done that.
I think Mourinho has evolved into the kind of coach who's now brought in to help underperforming teams from the kind of dressing room element, right? So he's there to rile players up, to do good man management. But I think the tactical part of his game is gone. And that's probably why I think Mourinho will end up as a national team coach pretty soon, because that would suit much more of the kind of manager that he's become. He'll see his players every other month. The whole point is to make them pretty solid, to ensure that he can get the best out of the best ones. And that's sort of where Mourinho's gone, whereas Pep is still at the apex of
and the
football.
tactics of national teams are much more primitive because they don't get together that much. We'll come to Mourinho. We'll definitely do a podcast on Mourinho, and you can be the fangirl. We're saying that Pep is on track to be the GOAT. You're not disputing that either. I mean, I know I'm more of a Pep fan than you are, but, you know, you admit in 2 years' time, we could be saying he's definitely the GOAT.
What price do you think GOATness has cost Pep?
I think in a lot of fields, including football coaching, to become the GOAT, you have to become less of a human. And I think that's what's happened with Pep. that he starts to treat the people around him as instruments that he can manipulate. And his eyes are always on this prize of greatness of winning trophies while playing beautiful football, and everyone else there is just to serve that. And he just is not very interested in the end. He's a bright man, but he's not very interested anymore in anything outside football, whether that's people or other ideas, other fields. I mean, he loves playing golf, but that's just to relax a little bit and then straight back into football. So yeah, I think he's become the GOAT and he's become less human.
I mean, one question that we're going to try and ask in this podcast is, would you like to hang out with Pep, have dinner with him, go...
Well, would you? I mean, Pep invites you for dinner in Barcelona, really good restaurant. What do you do?
It would be tough. I think I would probably decline. I think there'd be a danger in which he would be talking at me about football. And as much as I love football, 32 minutes, I think I'd find it a little bit too much. And as far as I can ascertain, I often find that when I'm in situations with men who are powerful, influential, rich, they do talk at me a lot. So I think I might struggle to keep pace with Pep peppering me.
Even men who are not powerful, influential, or rich probably talk at you. I'd probably do it.
No comment. So I think I'd struggle to get along with him. You, on the other hand, I think would have a great time.
Yeah,
You'd be fanboying all over him.
Yeah, no, I'd restrain myself, but I'd also probably eat like 4 meals while he was talking. Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms. Next week's episode is on Mohamed Salah, the man they call the Egyptian king. Be sure to give it a listen. New episodes every Thursday. This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
and Simon Cooper.
And this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.